Blackpool Better Start and who we are. So we're a 10-year National Lottery Community Fund funded programme, giving every new baby in Blackpool a better start in life. And we're currently 8 and a bit years through the 10-year programme. So we've used and are using the £45 million investment to improve speech, language and communication, diet and nutrition, and social emotional outcomes for our children under 4. The Better Start partnership is led by the NSPCC and includes Blackpool Council, Blackpool Teaching Hospitals, the college, the police, and lots of other organisations, including our commission providers. And we're all working together to break the cycle of poor outcomes for children in Blackpool. The Centre of Early Child Development is the engine room of the organisation and leads the partnership. We have a wide range of expertise across the team and use our knowledge and evidence of early child development to influence policy and practice and build local and national workforce capabilities. Our vision for Blackpool is for families to raise happy and healthy children who grow up in communities they feel proud of. And every new baby in Blackpool will have access to the care and nurture they need for healthy development and will be ready to start school. So in the webinar today, we're going to look at identifying need across all disciplines, so health, education, and early help children's services. We're going to look at our single point of entry for all speech and language referrals for children under 5, and then our multi-agency triage panel. And then we're going to look at using the Big Book of Ideas in targeted interventions. And I've got with me today Laura Cooper from our Commission Service Communicate KIC, who's going to talk about using the Big Book of Ideas in our early years settings through our targeted setting support work. I've got Claire Woodsford, our speech and language advisory teacher, who's going to talk about how we use WellComm and the Big Book of Ideas in our targeted groups, which are called Discoverers and Explorers. And I've got Lauren, who's one of our communication development workers, and she works in our home visiting service, and she's going to chat about we use WellComm and the Big Book of Ideas in that service. But first, I'm going to give you a little bit more information about the first stage, which is the assessment stage. So first of all, our health visiting teams, and in our case, I'm talking about health visitors and community nursery nurses or health visiting assistants. They complete the WellComm assessment alongside the Ages and Stages questionnaire at 3 of the 8 mandated healthy child development checks. So they're at 9 to 12 months, at the 2.5-year check, and at the preschool check. Now, the preschool check happens the year before children, the year before they start school. So usually they get a whole year before they start school after that preschool check, and that's important to note later on. These development checks usually take place in the child's home and together with the parents, as we know that WellComm is an observed assessment. Sometimes they take place in community venues like family hubs, which is on parental request, but largely it's in the home. Obviously, we've had to support the health visiting teams with the kits and with some training. So we've trained the team and provided them with the WellComm kits. And the WellComm training is also now part of new teams' induction process. So any new members of the workforce are trained as part of that induction. And Laura will go out in team meetings with the health visiting teams and update them and refresh them. So what we've got as a result of this system where we're looking at children's WellComm assessments is the ability to have a look at universally kind of the scores on the doors really in Blackpool. So this next slide gives you an indication of the data that we're able to collect. So this is from our data warehouse in our data dashboard that we present to our boards. So you can see there we've been using the WellComm since year 4, which was 4 years ago. And this is the sort of trends that we can observe around those children. Now we use the term expected level of development in terms of WellComm, we mean green, children who've got a green score. And you can see we've got trends and patterns that we can plan provision for around there. And the 3 tables represent the 3 different age groups that happens. We obviously get aggregated anonymized data. So we don't know individual children at this stage. So this is our universal data stage. But we do get obviously children's data where they have a amber or a red score, and that's through our panel. So the next slide talks about how our early years settings and childminders use WellComm. So they're encouraged to carry out a WellComm assessment with the entire preschool cohort in the autumn term, and any other children they may pick up as having a speech and language need through the kind of ordinarily available observation, assessment and planning cycle. And again, any children that come in partway through the year and any children that they identify as having a need later on in the year, they'll do one. But largely they do the whole cohort in the whole preschool cohort. So by preschool here, I mean those children that are going to school the following September. When they do the WellComm score, the check, they're advised to track back through the WellComm sections to when that child is green. So this will give them the information regarding where the children are at in terms of not just where they're not at. So we get the health teams in Blackpool use the WellComm at the section that's corresponding to the chronological age, and we get a binary score. Well, there's either green or then there's red and amber. But in our early year settings, they not only tell us where the children are at currently, but they tell us where they're working in, which section they're working in. So in order for us to get to that stage with our early year settings, obviously we've had to provide them with training, and we've given them the kits. And then we also provide them with support, and our support for early year settings is universal. So all early year settings get support. They all are able to access the free training in how to use the WellComm, and they've all had a toolkit. And we've also got a loan-in service for childminders in terms of if they've picked up children's speech and language need, we will loan them a kit and they can carry out a comprehensive assessment. The other thing about the training is that not only do we provide them training to use the assessment toolkit, but then we also provide a piece of training for them to look at the big book of ideas. And then if they want to, we can support them with cohort tracking. And another thing that we've just started doing in the last year is we've just started to use the WellComm Wizard. So we've just purchased some WellComm Wizard licenses with a small pilot. Each of the 3 courses that we use can be adaptable depending on the setting and how much time they've got to spare. But largely what we'd rather do is do a whole setting for an hour in a team meeting than maybe just one member of staff for a half a day. So it's kind of like more is better, the more people that know how to do it. But Laura will tell you more about the support a little bit later on. So yeah, I've talked about the wizard. We wanted to try and support cohort tracking and predicting need in settings, especially because as a local authority, it also gives us access to the universal data from settings. And this is especially beneficial as that preschool check that I was just telling you about that health do. Some of that data can be over a year old before children transition into reception. And the wizard gives us the opportunity to look at data at a ward level, at a postcode level, and to support schools that sort of transition into school. So the next sort of piece of the workforce that's our emerging work is we are a family hub local authority, one of the 75, and we're lucky to have that family hub funding. So we've been able to invest in staffing for family hubs and also in their training and development of their workers. Also through the lottery funding, we have 2 dedicated early years librarians. They're called early years library engagement workers. And the library engagement workers have been instrumental really in supporting the wider library staff to have a better understanding about children's speech and language need. So we have spent some time training the family hub workers and the frontline library staff members in Speech and Language UK's early talk, and they're developing an understanding of early language development now. A practitioner from each hub is attending WellComm training this month. So we have 3 family hubs in Blackpool, so we have a practitioner from each of those hubs attending the training. And currently, because we are building those hub workers, their understanding of early child development and early language development, when they are identifying a need, our speech and language advisory teacher, Claire, who you'll meet shortly, will go into the family hub, into the group, and she'll complete the WellComm assessment there with the family. So the next steps in terms of, that blue sky, the gold standard, that go further, whatever you want to call it, all family hub workers, there are 9 of them, and the connectors, where we want them to get trained in WellComm assessment so that they can routinely complete WellComm assessments with families that come their way. And we'd like every child under 4 that's open to an early help assessment would have a WellComm as part of that assessment process. And the timeline for those next steps is the end of this financial year. So hopefully by April, if we're invited back again, we'll tell you the progress that we've made on that, and hopefully we're making good progress there. The thing about the family hub process, though, I have to tell you, is there's lots of competing need. So we're up there competing with other identified needs. So yeah, we're hoping that the time frame of the 1st of April will work. So we've talked about how health identify children with speech and language need, and how our early year settings do, and how our early help teams and family hubs teams are hoping to identify that need. But now I want to tell you kind of what we do with the information that we get. So we have a single point of entry referral form, which leads to a multi-agency triage panel. So these numbers came from the last financial year, so 22-23, and we had 631 referrals in to the panel. And you can see there the sort of numbers in terms of the ages of children. So from health, from that first development check, we get about 43. From education, the numbers for that age group are very small. We don't have a big early years sector for the under 2s in Blackpool. So that's kind of reflective of that. So just for context, we've got 53 early year settings and 38 childminders in Blackpool, so we're quite a small authority. The 2 to 2.5 year check, those children sort of 18 months to 31 months, the vast majority of those come from health, so 273, a smaller reflection of that from education, and then you'll see, quite rightly, a smaller number of those come from health in that preschool check, and a larger number come from education. So that gives you sort of an idea of where the referrals come from. We do have a few children that come from other agencies, and sometimes last year we had 3, so there is very few, but significant to note that we sometimes get children referred in from social care. So it's emerging, starting to begin. And also, interestingly, the pathway that I'm going to talk to you about, the only agency that don't refer into the single point of entry referral form are GPs. So they like to use a different system. And when that happens, children are referred straight to the NHS. They don't come through our triage panel pathway. So it can be, and it has been on one occasion, where a speech and language therapist refers back into our panel because they've got them at assessment level and they've realised that that child has got a targeted level need. So they'll refer us back into the panel. So we do have one referral. We did have one referral last year from a speech and language therapist, which is quite interesting. So our we call it the post-WellComm speech and language communication triage panel. Not the snappiest, we know that, but that's what it is. It's like, you know, the good old adage, it describes what it does on the tin. And it's a really good example of early identification of speech and language need in partnership with intervention providers, our community connectors, and they bring the voice of the family. So what happened with the emerging evidence from the Ages and Stages questionnaire and the early years foundation stage profile results resulted in the need to identify a common speech and language need assessment tool which could be used across the partnership. So WellComm was identified, and the need for a single referral system and a multi-agency panel was identified. So yeah, during the year, last financial year, 3,200 children aged 9 months to 4 years had an assessment using the WellComm assessment tool. And out of those, you've seen there that 631 were referred into the panel due to the red or amber score. This means that 21% of children under 4 in Blackpool have an identified speech and language need. So assessment starts, and that early identification starts with the WellComm. So on the panel, we have our quality inclusion team manager from Blackpool Council, Kate Barker. We have a speech and language therapist from the NHS. So we've currently got Claire Forster. We have a speech and language therapist from Communicate, KIC, our commission service, which is Laura, who you'll meet. We have our speech language communication advisory teacher, Claire, a community connector, and I'll describe what the role is. And the community connectors are come straight from the Centre of Early Child Development. And we have a triage panel administrator from the Centre of Early Child Development, and it's chaired by me, and I'm the early years senior manager. So the work that happens before the triage is we get the referrals in, we meet fortnightly and we get the referrals in, and we close the referral window a fortnight before the next panel. So the referrals come in and we talk about them the fortnight later. So the longest a child will wait to be talked about at the panel is a fortnight. And in that time, we make contact with the families and our community connector service. We've got 2 dedicated community connectors who've got they've had the Spark, Han and Spark training. They understand how the WellComm works, and our community connectors are recruited from our family pool in Blackpool. So they're parents of Blackpool, and the whole that service is a whole peer-led service. So they call the families and they knock on the doors, and they take them an information pack about some of the interventions that they might be open to. They also, we get books gifted from the National Literacy Trust or the Book Trust, and every family that has a referral into the triage panel gets a book gifted to them. And the aim of that initial contact is to gather as much information about the child and their family as possible before the panel meet, so we can get a holistic view of the family and the child, and not just the clinical information that's being presented to us on the referral and in the WellComm. So we kind of do this by triangulating data we gather from the community connector, from the experts on the panel in terms of those therapists, and from what the WellComm is telling us. And you know, having those conversations with parents, explaining the process and the different types of services available to them. And we gain permission from parents to talk to earlier settings. So where the referral may have come in from a health colleague, and that child is at an early year setting, but that early year setting may or may not have picked it up just yet, or they might be doing some quality first teaching before they refer in. We call the setting and we say to the settings, can you do a WellComm? Can you tell us what's going on? Can you track back to where that child is at rather than where they're not at? And that gives us a really good idea of where that child is and the type of intervention that they may need. The other thing that we get from parents at that point when we're talking about the interventions is we get an indication of where they would prefer to access the speech and language support. And this is really, really important when it comes to thinking about Marie Gascoigne's balanced system approach, the importance of working with parents and that importance of it being place-based and where people, that accessibility. So in some cases, when we're describing our home visiting service, which we'll talk about shortly, some families might say, oh, I don't want you to come to my home. I've got 3 children under 5 and 2 dogs. It's chaos. Nothing can, I won't have the space in my home. And we'll say that's fine. We'll give you your support out in the community. And then equally so, some families say, I work full time. My child goes to nursery full time. What does that look like? And we say, well, we'll do the work in the setting then. And then also they might say, I don't like coming to groups. I find groups, I'm quite anxious. I've got sort of social anxiety. I don't want to come to a group. So then we can use that information basically to plan where and when the intervention takes place. So in the triage panel, we've talked about over 2,000 children since we started in February 2020. Children and the families are discussed and are offered one or more intervention, depending on the WellComm score, the clinical information, and the conversations that we've had with families. And this can be at a universal, targeted, and a specialist level. All the interventions are evidence-based and take place where the children are and involve coaching for the adults who spend most of the time with the children, most importantly parents, but also the early years workforce who see children in their settings. So as I've described, this can be in the home, in our home visiting service. We've got Hannah and It Takes Two to Talk, support for children in their early year settings using ICANN and Early Talk Boost, as well as the NHS clinical speech and language therapy service. Once children reach the end of their intervention, they're returned to panel by the provider of that service and are discussed, the next steps are discussed. And this can include escalation from targeted to specialist if they weren't already identified for specialist at the time. It can also include de-escalation down from specialist to targeted, or for them to be discharged if they've made good progress. We also have some work around our universal groups. So the universal groups in family hubs are called Babbling Babies, Talking Toddlers, and Chatting with Your Children, which are the early talk groups. So that we're following those early talk strategies in there. I'm going to just look at the pathway very briefly before handing over to Laura, who's going to talk to you more about using the big book of ideas. But this is just really a kind of much simplified version of what I've just said. But just to recap, the early year settings, including childminders, WellComm all of the preschool cohort, and then any other children that they've got in their care that they've got concerns around. And then the health visiting teams see their children with the WellComm at 9 to 12 months, 2.5 years, and the preschool healthy child development check. The WellComm is completed. If they score red or amber, they're referred into the triage panel using the single point of access referral form. If they score green, there's a caveat to this coming up, they go into universal support in a setting, in a family hub or a stay and play group. We hold a virtual triage meeting every fortnight. The members of the panel are there. And the interventions include the speech and language home visiting service. We have Hannon, It Takes Two to Talk. We've got support in the settings using the Big Book of Ideas, Early Talk and Early Talk Boost. We've got an NHS dedicated telephone helpline, which we very rarely, but occasionally have to use just to signpost families to get a little bit more information. Sometimes we use this when the connectors have spoken to the families and the families aren't concerned, but the need has been picked up by a professional. So we signpost them to the helpline so that they can get a little bit of a better understanding of maybe what's going on. And then also we've got the NHS therapeutic clinic. So we've got community clinic, which is largely for children that have just got single need of speech and language. Then there is the early years clinic, which is for children with more complex needs, where speech and language forms part of that complexity. And then we've got a phonology clinic, which is for children who have got speech sounds. So on that note, we do get some green referrals coming into panel where the primary need might be speech sounds or social communication, which aren't necessarily so easily picked up using the WellComm. So children may appear green. Okay, so next I'm going to introduce you to the people who have really kindly helped me with this today. So first of all, you're going to hear from Laura Cooper, who's a speech and language therapist for working for Communicate KIC. And Laura is going to talk to you about early year setting support. Then I have Claire Woodsford, who's a speech, language and communication advisory teacher, who's going to talk to you about using the Big Book of Ideas and the WellComm in targeted sessions in family hubs. And then finally, I'll introduce you to Lauren Maguire, who is a communication development worker working in our home visiting team. And she's going to talk to you about using WellComm and the Big Book of Ideas in that service. So I will hand you over to Laura. Thank you.
Hi, so I'm going to talk about the targeted setting support service that we offer at Communicate for those that have been identified with a need through the triage panel. And it's largely run by our speech and language therapy assistants who have oversight from specialist speech and language therapists. So as a therapist, I will answer any more specific queries around more specialist children and some of those more complex target kind of setting, that it isn't just a straight off the WellComm. So we'll use that. The targeted support, basically our assistants will get in touch with the setting when we receive the referral and arrange a time to go and meet with their lead worker. So either their key workers or their communication champion who's got more skills around communication in the setting. At that initial visit, we will then discuss the child's WellComm scores. If they've completed the WellComm fully, then we will talk about the children's progress and their functional communication skills in the setting and what they know about going on at home. We'll chat around if other professionals are involved and what advice they might have had from the other agencies, and then we will agree the next steps to meet that child's communication needs, taking in all of that information in together. The strategies are then recommended and the settings are signposted to various different aspects of the Big Book of Ideas, depending on what the strategy was. And then we actively encourage the settings to embed these within their provision, not just for that specific child, but across the board where useful, and to share the targets with the families. And then we'll go back and review the provision a little while later and check how the child has been doing, if there's been any progress, and what the next steps should be for that child in terms of along their speech and language journey. So that could be a discharge, it could be another round of setting support to continue and adapt new targets if they've moved rooms or there's been a change in provision, or it might be that they need more specialist services from the NHS or something else. in between that, if it's felt that the setting would benefit from some additional support as part of our universal offer that Communicate offer to settings and childminders, we can then go in and support them more practically with some coaching around how to embed and use those strategies that we've talked about, or how to embed the WellComm activities into provision to get more impact from it. We don't just base the targets off the WellComm scores. I think settings get quite confident quite quickly with working out the gaps and setting targets straight in correlation. But what we try and do is use that WellComm as an objective measure, as a baseline, and then wrap around all the extra functional skills that we're seeing in setting, and link with what the setting's current priorities are and what they're working on and what their current capacity levels are in terms of staffing, as to what they're going to be able to realistically implement consistently in the time frame that we're looking at, and what other changes might be going on for the family. Everything is recorded on a shared record system, so it moves between the different intervention services as appropriate. So it's all the time we're continuing to gather information about where these children are at and how their progress is developing, using the WellComm across the different agencies. So it's really useful to track that change over time. Yeah, always has an SLT around to support as needed.
Thanks, Laura. Okay, I'll move on to Claire, who's our speech and language advisory teacher. Oh,
hello.
Hello. I
Have you
don't
got
think
me,
my
Catherine?
yes, I have, but I don't think my slides. I think my slides have stopped moving again. So
Oh
I'm going.
no.
Yeah, I think it's just because I've stopped too long. You continue to talk, and I will
Okay.
stop sharing, and I'll share again.
Okay. So our community groups are for children that have been referred through to our home visiting service. They are invited to attend as soon as they're referred into us, and whilst they're waiting for the intervention, as well as during the intervention and when they've finished the intervention. So our Discoverers groups are held 3 times a week in different venues across Blackpool. And the majority of the children are working within section 1 and 2 of the WellComm. They will have had a WellComm assessment at referral, and so that will be an up-to-date referral if they come to us straight away. We also run a weekly explorers group for children who are ready for a bit more structure, and these children are in general working within section 3 and 4 of WellComm. We use the Big Book of Ideas to support and inform our planning, with the general strategies from the back of the book as a basis for our adult and child interactions, and this will for parents throughout the time they attend group. And we use the activities and the games from the Big Book of Ideas within our sessions. Okay, next slide please, Catherine.
There you go.
So thank you. For our Discoverers group, we use a range of ideas, as I said, from section 1, section 2, and the attention and listening section at the back of the book. So if we think about section 1, activity 1.1, for example, supports children, how to learn and respond to the name. You've got section 1B, section 1C that focus on those essential skills of social play and turn taking.
We do seem to be
Claire,
having a
yeah,
technical difficulty.
just breaking up there, Claire. I'll fill in. So they're using those essential skills that social play and turn taking. They use these in the appendix section, and it provides lots of ideas to support those attention and listening skills, engaging and responding in nursery rhymes, listening and responding to sounds. And you can see from the examples of this, they provide the kind of why this is important to share with parents as an overview of the activity, and include a kind of step up and step down. Are you back, Claire?
I don't know what happened there. Was
Okay.
it only me who left?
It was
who
yes,
left the
it
room?
was yes, it was
Well,
you. Just you.
I
Well
do
done.
apologise.
That's
Yeah.
okay. Right, next
Okay,
slide.
Catherine.
We're
Yes,
on the next one. There you go.
Thank you. Thank you. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
Really don't know what happened. So for our Explorers group, as I said before, we mainly use sections 3 and 4 along with those general strategies and the intention and listening activities. As you can see, the examples show there are specific sections to promote a range of skills. For example, 3.1, learning through play, and 3.4, understanding sentences with 2 keywords. And other activities focus on learning the name of body parts and action rhymes. And then section 4 provides a range of ideas to add extra language, for example, shopping games, posting games, hiding, and some lovely small world play. So essentially for us, Big Book of Ideas is used before, during and after our intervention, either in the home or in a group situation. So I think Lauren is now going to talk to you about how we use the Big Book of Ideas in our home visits.
Thanks, Claire.
Thanks, Claire. So children are referred through to the home visiting service via the speech and language triage panel that Catherine mentioned earlier. The criteria for children being referred are that they're under 3 years old and that they attend an early years setting less than 15 hours a week. Our intervention is an 8-week programme aimed at children with a speech and language delay, but we're increasingly working with children that have social communication difficulties. Children will have been welcomed at referral and at the start of the intervention. We also re-welcome them at the end of the intervention and at the 12-week review. The home visiting intervention is primarily focused on parental coaching using the Hannon Spark methodology. And at around week 5 of the intervention, we then use the Big Book of Ideas to set targets for the children based on their scores. And this allows parents to apply the skills that they've learned throughout the intervention in a practical way. Practitioners will model and coach parents on how to implement the suggested activities from the Big Book of Ideas. And the Big Book of Ideas activity sheets are then left with the parents and reviewed the following week as part of the coaching cycle. The fact that there is a step up and step down means that they can be adapted to that child's level. And at the end of the intervention, the child is then re-welcomed and next steps are established. Big Book of Ideas activities are shared with the parents and left with them to work on, and then we repeat the welcome at the 12-week review.
Thanks, Lauren. Thank you. So we are at the end of our presentation. I'm going to stop sharing now, and I think we've got some time for some questions, and I think Paul's been fielding the questions for us. Is that right, Paul?
Beg your pardon. Yes, indeed. But there are a few questions coming through. So Catherine, I'll just fire whatever comes through to me across your way, and then you can decide whether you're going to answer or whether that's going through to one of your
hand it to somebody else.
one of your colleagues. When did this initiative kick off within Blackpool?
Well, it's interesting. We've been using the WellComm since 2019, but the first triage panel that we had was held in February in 2020. But yeah, and then we all know what happened in March 2020. So it was kind of, I came into post in February 2020, and we had the first triage panel a week after. And then 4 weeks after that, we went into lockdown. So essentially, we've been using the WellComm since 2019. But actually, Laura was here before me. She's got a hand up. She's probably got more to say.
I was going to say that's when the triage started, was in 2019. And before that, there was about 18 months, maybe 2 years worth of home visiting with health visitors using the WellComm as well. So it's been around for a long time in Blackpool.
Okay. And just another question has come through. Can you tell us, do you have any plans to use across primary?
Yes, we do. And that's a very well timed question, because I chair the communication strategy group in Blackpool, which is a 0 to 1925 partnership in terms of speech and language. And we've just had where it appears we're having success is where schools have had a good experience of using WellComm, where they've got a maintained nursery school, because we offer our early years support to all early years provision. So regardless of whether it's a private or it's a maintained nursery class in a school. So where schools have experienced a good, where they've had a good experience using WellComm, they're more inclined to buy the primary. So we're working with those schools. Who were not so great with are those schools that haven't got a maintained nursery class. So I am working with our head of SEND to do a small pilot with some settings that don't have nursery classes attached to them, and we're going to think about buying them the primary kit. So I know that I've just had a little quote from Verony about that. So it's emerging work, but it's watch this space again.
Good. Okay. Thank you for that, Catherine. Okay, so we have another one questions. There are a few questions coming through now. Do you work alongside the other Better Start regions? And is it a consistent approach across the whole of Better Start?
Well, that's a really good question. So there, you may know there are 4 other sites. For those of you that don't know, they include Bradford, Lambeth, Southend and Nottingham. And we regularly get together across the 5 sites. So recently, in March this year, we did a 5-site speech and language focused learning event. The majority of us are using WellComm. We're all doing similar work with early year settings and working in partnership. So the other Better Start partnerships are partnerships including their health teams. It seems that some of the Better Start, so originally Better Start was set up to work with the most disadvantaged wards in a locality. And very quickly, we were able to roll out the offer for not much more of a financial envelope across the whole town, just rather than just in the 7 wards. So I feel, been able to offer this to all the families in Blackpool, really, rather than just those in the wards. And I think what's happened in some of our other Better Start regions, and anybody that's on the call from another Better Start area, feel free to chip in. But I think in some of the other areas, they're geographically much bigger, so have stuck to their wards more and done that work there. So we've spread ourselves thinly, but across the patch, and they've concentrated on the wards, but with equal success and equal work. The idea, of course, of Better Start is it's test and learn, and we scale it up at the end of the funding. So at some point, the funding will need to be found from the local authority or from the ICB or whoever, benefactors would come along to fund us. But the idea is that it's scaled up. So wherever there has been a Better Start piece of work, it should be scaled up across the patch and then regionally from there.
Okay, thank you for that. And can you provide more information on how you work with the parents within the home? Do you get support, or is there reluctance?
We're very, very lucky. I think that, Claire leads the team, so she might be able to tell you a little bit more. But for now, I think the connector service, having that initial conversation, it makes everything really it's very disarming, when you have a conversation with a peer, with another parent, another Blackpool person about a service. And actually we've got 1 or 2 of our connectors now that have actually been through our home visiting service. So have been, before they were connectors, they had been through our service. So but yeah, Claire, do you want to talk about retention and attrition rates and stuff? Yeah.
Generally, we have 4 home visit communication development workers that work within the home visiting service, and so we will work with approximately 30 families over a quarter. The intervention is 8 weeks, but then we've got induction, at the start, and then assessment. There's a review period, etc. And what we find is the vast majority of parents are very, very welcoming. They're very pleased that we're coming into their home to support the children, particularly as some of our parents, you know, they do find it hard to go out into groups, you know, when they don't know anybody. So this is why the group works well, because once they've got a home visitor, they're then more likely to go to attend one of our community-based groups. But our the number of families we managed to keep, I mean, last quarter we didn't have any parents that you know, weren't able to do the full 8-week program. Occasionally we'll have a family that perhaps may move out of area. They might start nursery and feel that the support is better in the nursery. And then of course there are always you know, last quarter I think was an anomaly. There's always one or two families that feel it's not for them and they can't commit. But generally our service is very well received, and the home visitors work really hard coaching the parents and modeling all those really key interaction strategies, and then they follow it up the following week, and yeah, we have a very, very good retention.
We have a good follow-on question to that, and you might bring Claire back into this one again, Catherine. Do you have any advice around working with EAL children, and how do you work with those families differently?
Yeah, so that's really, really good, because again, it came up in our communication strategy meeting this morning. So I'll let Claire talk about the sort of the technical details, but in Blackpool, so I worked in Croydon before I worked in Blackpool. So 3 years ago, nearly 4 years ago now, I worked in Croydon, where there's massive diversity, and in Blackpool there is a similar reach in terms of the numbers of different language, but a lot less volume. So it's a very different dynamic in the fact that there are no pockets of communities in Blackpool. We might just have one of one language. So there aren't there isn't that sort of community support available for families around the complexity of having English as an additional language. So Claire, come on and talk to us about what you do in your service.
Yeah, so sorry, my video isn't going very quick today.
Just leave yourself switched on. Okay,
I will do. So what we do when the referral comes through, there is a section on there where they can indicate if a translator is needed. So right at the beginning, if a translator is needed, we can, you know, that can be part of our, you know, when we go out and do an assessment. However, if a translator isn't needed and there are some, you know, elements of, you know, they've got you know, bilingualism, so there's some elements of English in there. What we find that good practice in teaching, in, you know, in children developing their communication skills is good practice for whether they've got bilingual children or whether they aren't, you know, whether they are, you know, just showing a sort of slight delay in communication development. The staff will do lots and lots of modelling. We will use pictures and gestures to support. And what we find is that generally the parents with children that have got, you know, that are bilingual children and are just developing that English as their English language skills, interact well with us and enjoy coming to the groups, because they can find then, you know, if perhaps then they can meet other parents that have got English as an additional language as well. I don't know if Lauren wants to add a little bit more to that. Lauren, you know,
can I just add another part of that, so that so another question's come in and you might feel this between you then. Have you also needed to access interpreters to help work with families? Has this been straightforward?
No. Yes, we do access interpreters. It's not easy to do so. We use the same service that the NHS use, and it's just not easy to find interpreters. And again, kind of what we've not got is a community-led service, you know, in terms of having members of the community that can support families that have English as an additional language. Laura, do you want to say how difficult it is? Do you want to chip in?
Yeah, I'll chip in from a setting support point of view. So often the referrals will come through triage, and then they will be highlighted as to whether we think it's either a language difficulty or it could potentially be that they're learning English as an additional language, but it's unclear on the referral at that point. So often our assistants will go out and try and do a bit more fact finding and support settings to encourage finding out what is the picture in terms of their home language development and their skill set and their comparable English development using the WellComm. So some settings are translating the WellComm, where they've got the skills to do that, and then trying to match and see what language progression over time is looking like. And in the meantime, looking at ensuring that they've got a language-rich, communication-friendly environment that would facilitate whichever was a primary difficulty in them learning language. But yes, translators are always a challenge, because we also run the home visiting, and it's not home visiting, the Hannon workshops. So yes, a challenge for us too.
Okay, thank you for that. Catherine, this is very clearly directed to you. How many members of staff do you have in your team altogether, and how many are full-time?
Okay, so I have Claire, who leads the home visitors and the that home visiting team, and Lauren is one of 4 full-time home visitors. Now they don't have they do groups as well as the home visiting service, so they don't entirely work 100% on actual visiting families in the home. So discoverers and explorers that Claire described before, they do some group work. And then we communicate to do the setting support and to do Hannon It Takes Two. So I get from the commission some of Laura, which is very, very welcomed. But we could always do with more. And then Laura, do you want to tell how many communication practitioners, the speech and language therapy assistants there are working on the Blackpool piece of work?
Yeah, so we currently have 6 assistants working part-time on that, and then we have made, I think it is about 2 days a week of SLT time to supervise that specific piece of work, and then we have a whole therapist amount of time, full time, to do the Hannon parent workshops.
Okay, thank you for that. I have one last question in our bank, which is leading us on very clearly to or close to 3 o'clock finish. Do you have any systems in place to ensure all settings screen their children? And if not, what system is in place to make sure children aren't missed?
Laura, do you want to do that one as well?
I thought you would be coming to me for that one. So yes. So we hold some records around settings. So we kind of track internally whether a setting is referring children through a triage panel. And if we're not seeing regular referrals, we gently probe and ask a question as to why. But also universally, our assistants are in and out of settings sort of fortnightly at least, and have regular contact with settings, and they have key targets that we work towards. One of them being, are you actively screening all of your preschool children and any child that has concerns about? Great. When did you last screen them? Lovely. How many were red and amber? Great. Have you done the referral forms and sought consent? Do you need any support with that? So we are quite actively pursuing that, and if they tell us on one visit that they haven't, we will then make a note and do a follow-up visit quite quickly afterwards to ensure that that does, and internally keep a record roughly of how many kids they've said, oh yeah, we've got 12 kids that we're struggling with, and then we'll just kind of internally track whether those 12 kids are making it through to triage and probe accordingly.
Okay, thank you for that. I can't see any more questions coming through, so this is just one final prompt. If anybody has a question, I'll get that in very quickly. If not, we're going to call our session to a close, and anybody that does have any follow-up questions, they can prompt those questions through to us, and we'll make sure we can get answers to you. I think after the session, we will be making available the presentation, and any question and answer session that we've had, we'll make that. One of my colleagues has also just placed a short survey in the chat area. I would just prompt you, if you could, before we leave the session today, to complete that short survey for us at GL, because that helps us with our future planning for events and webinars like this. Okay, can I just please join me in thanking all our presenters today, for Catherine, Laura, Lauren and Claire, for their time and their excellent and informative insight, and allowing us to see how their project has been working at first hand. Thank you very much, everybody, and that's the close of our session.